Okay, hello everyone. It's minus 16 degrees Celsius here in Etobicoke, Canada. And, since I have an inefficient habit of smoking, I'm giving this talk in my car, like outside of a Starbucks. And if the viewers are interested, feel free to join the channel members. Alright guys, you're gonna hear the sound of, my phone coming alive. There we go, okay. So, find the music and we dive into it. Today's episode is very interesting. I'm gonna say, it's a bit humorous, but alright, almost there. Alright. First things first, I want to share with the viewers this idea before I begin. Just something I feel like sharing in this episode. You see, recently I have understood the value of patience. And I have understood the value of endless endurance. And what this means is that we human beings are in a conditional reality. The self is in a world. There's multiple selves living for certain, values in the world. And so your sense of self and the archetypal position you hold may certain moments in life be inefficient, inaccurate, imperfect, defeated, imagine someone who has never been defeated in anything. Do you know? Once they get defeated, they access the self they could have been. This self that could have been is the most important thing, and it's the romance of the human mind. So for this episode, I've said something hilarious in previous talks. Sorry guys, let me double check. Oh, okay, it's recording. Welcome everybody. Glad to have participants. Feel free to share ideas. I'll try my best to respond to the chat section. I gotta start doing that at the end. But anyways, I'm building up to something here, something important. See, in previous talks, I had said something hilarious, okay? And someone may be like, is this guy justifying his own humor? But in a previous talk, I remember I started talking about the Wright brothers, and my playful mind, created a hypothetical story. And I'm like, what if, when the Wright brothers were kids, like they loved birds, and imagine their father was an engineer, and then imagine like their father's friend, another engineer, right? And so, the father's like, hey, looks at his colleague, his work buddy, and he's like, hey man, come and meet my kids, And so his work buddy, the friend of the father comes to the Wright brothers when they're little kids, and he says, hey kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the Wright brothers both look at the guy and they're like, we want to be birds, and at that moment, right, the Wright brothers' father feels embarrassed, and he's like, children, what do you mean you want to be birds? It's like, give a proper answer. This guy's like, I work with this guy. So anyways, I was saying this playful joke pretty much that the Wright brothers wanted to be birds. So for this episode, I saw that humor that I had shared in previous talks. I heard it in a different way, you know. Just my apologies. I'm just looking for something. Just a second. Okay. Again, you know, apologies for the pauses, miscellaneous sounds and whatnot, guys. You know, I'm not I'm not an android giving this talk, you know. Anyways, back to it. So pretty much I was like, okay, so we have the Wright brothers. These guys built the plane. It's one of the coolest inventions ever. They're one of the Wright brothers are to me like the first pilots, you know. That means they weren't the first, you know, people to fly, but rather the first people to pilot as well. To pilot the skies of mankind, you know. So for me, I was like, okay, look at what happened there, right? The human beings, the Wright brothers, they saw birds and they wanted to access that experiential state. And so technologically, they accessed it. Right? And when we look at, for example, engines and systems, let me tell you something so incredible about the human being and when it comes to civilization and society, right? The human being was in some sense a creature raised in the forest and jungle and whatnot. At some point, it decides to become civil. It decides to separate itself from the environment that was telling it what to do. So for the first time ever, it can access a neutral universe and then begin again. You see, the point I'm trying to make here is that the Wright brothers were inspired by something that was present in their reality. That means birds were flying, human beings weren't. These guys got to work. Do you know? And so they made something, and nowadays it's so casual. People get on airplanes and, you know, they complain about not having Wi-Fi on an airplane. Who was it? This comedian was talking about it. You know? And people don't have Wi-Fi on airplanes, but it's as if the comedian was like, you're flying in a sky in a giant metal box, you know? Show some gratefulness, future generations, you know? And so, what I'm trying to say is that if we were to take the Wright brothers as an example of human beings that lived and fulfilled their purpose, we can see that their purpose was something in their environment that was inspiring them. You see, I think that human civility, human consciousness was an invention. It's an invention, consciousness. Why? Because in order to invent something new, you have to, for a second, pause the past. And this creature, at some point in its evolutionary history, was able to be like, wait a minute, what if I'm not everything I think I am, or everything I'm conditioned to be? Do you see, like, so many people talk about slavery, right? I mean, slavery in many different cultures, it's been there. It was like a, you know, effed up pastime of human beings. And nowadays, people feel slavery is like there is no slavery, okay? But let me tell you, there is a hierarchy, and as long as there is hierarchy, people are dependent on, you know, their environments. So it's another way of saying, if you're in a hierarchical system, and any position you are, it's kind of like a mountain. It's like anywhere you are in the mountain, there is an archetypal position that is in front of you, and there is an archetypal position that is behind you. You know, ancient mystical cultures had such unique perceptions that when the human being was born, they did not fathom the concept of death and birth in the same way that we do now. For them, it was the opposite, right? Like right now, we are born as a little kid, we become an old person and we pass away, right? But from the other perspective, like who was it? I don't know why I'm remembering so many comedians today, you know, but it was George Carlin. And George Carlin had said something which I think the Benjamin Button film was inspired out of. He said, what if the human being was life was the opposite? That means you were born as an old man and you got younger, and then you stopped existing. Like, we cannot ignore how life is like a TV series. And every day we wake up, it's like, yo, another episode? Yo, how did the production company get everything together? You know, recently I was watching some TikTok videos. And these TikTok videos, you know, it was like advice from, like, I don't know, 50 to 60-year-old successful people. And there was one person who was saying that don't just say and do. Do you know, I'm finding myself, you know, as, you know, I'll say it, you know, let me be the example. I find myself in a position where, as a human being, I have lived more as a mind than a body. People are going to be like, Mr. Within, what do you mean? You've been living as a body the whole time. And I'll be like, consciously, not per se. I have had moments where I have made myself selfless to not experience pain. And I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I have done that. There has been moments where I have shifted my attention to the whole moment, right? Moments usually when I get intimidated or I have fear. You know, there was a time where I was like, why is the human being, when it gets afraid, why does the body go to paralysis? I was like, sure, there's a biological explanation, but what if there's also a cognitive psychological explanation? And, you know, if you entertain a metaphysical perspective, and metaphysics means after the physics. That means once we're, like, you see, there's a type of spiritualities that's like, forget the world, kids, let's go to Neverland, you know. And then there's another type of spirituality that asks of you to be a commander of your realm. And in order to be a commander of your conscious experience, you must see what is in your command. And you must have the ability to, in any situation, whether it's yourself, others, or world, to be able to see the good, bad, and neutral. This was an ability I did not have when I was young. When I was young, people were good or bad. That's it. You know? There was no neutral people. Do you know? It's like either someone was more inclined to the, or, you know, they're like, if it was a ratio, like, you know, they were more towards good or more towards evil, right? And when I say good and evil, I'm not trying to generalize. Good and evil is consequential. Okay, like, I'll tell you something hilarious, right? In modern society, you know, if a psychopath goes out into the public and behaves, people get scared, startled. They're like, this guy's crazy, do something, authorities and all of this, right? But back in the day, during times where, like, medieval times, right, when there was a psychopath, the king would be like, okay, send this guy in the battlefield. Do you know what I'm saying? That means the psychopath did not have value, does not have value in modern society. It creeps us out. But in ancient medieval society, they're like, okay, this guy's fucking insane. Put him in front of, let him destroy. Like, it was as if the psychopath was a creature of war. Do you know? in through ancient perception, I'm saying. So what I'm saying, and it's not this, guys, there's so many different things, right? If anybody wants to read about power structures and power systems and their history and the types of power, I would say Michel Foucault is an interesting read. Michel Foucault makes this incredible point that if you look at society, right, back in the day, there was a jester. right? The king was sitting in the throne and there was a jester, and the jester came and did stupid shit, and the king was like, entertainment, good job. It's like, get this jester, a chicken's leg and a, maiden. So what I'm saying is, what Michel Foucault was saying was that you had the jester, the joker archetype, being something that was available. It was respected. That means the jester of the king was above the peasant. That means if there was a normal peasant working hard, being a farmer, and there was a jester acting like a freak or something, and making the king laugh, the jester was held in high regard. They're like, this jester works in the palace. We peasants can't even get close to the palace.
Oh, you want to go over to the Tim Hortons?
Yeah, maybe that's an idea.
Okay.
See you
shortly. Guys, I think I just heard, strategy coordination outside of my window. But anyways, what I'm trying to say, oh man, where was I? Oh yeah, the Joker. So the guy it was okay to be weird back in the day, but now to be weird is not okay. And so what we notice that has accompanied human conscious civility, right, self-awareness, is incredible specification. So we are at a time where I would say people are not liking each other for actually who they are. They are liking each other for the amount of details and specifications that activate in their own mind. Do you see? It's all about rhythms and freedom. Beings that are planet, but in this plane of existence is instantaneity. And those beings that do not give themselves instantaneous truth, lifetimes after lifetimes, you will baffle yourself. Because you did not accept the simple. I had this problem too. When I was younger, I had the ego of like some guy trying to figure out truth. Do you understand? When I was younger, I was like, yo, I've solved the Rubik's Cube. It's like mysticism is my next Rubik's Cube. Do you know mystical truth? And after all these years of just trying to concentrate on what is going on here, I am realizing that we are an actor, not a director of the outer realms. We're an actor. And you can choose to have, let's say, archetypes of leadership or whatnot. But what I'm saying is, in front of your eyes, you are an actor in a film you didn't direct. But behind your eyes, you are an actor in a film you did direct. You're also the world of that actor. So behind your eyes, you have a control and ability, right? And I gave this talk, which it got a lot of views, actually. What was it called? Oh, man. Emotional reactions to an inner realm suggests a non-physical being. Something like this, I think. Okay? If people search Mr. Within, MW emotional reactions or something, like, that lecture may show up. But in that lecture, I was saying that the human experience, like, let's say right now I say I'm a materialist. Let's say right now I'm just saying, yo, physicality is the only thing that exists. Okay? But then I look at the idea of me and I'm like, wait a minute though. My body exists, my brain exists, but what my brain is producing seems to be non-physical imagery. So what I'm trying to tell viewers is that even though we appear to be in one physical existential dimension, our consciousness is being influenced by also a non-physical subjective dimension. And we have ignored this because the story of the world began with matter first. Mysticism is different. Mystics, if you ask a mystic, like the origin of reality, it's as if space. You were space before you were substance. But if you ask someone who's, a creature of shape, a creature of form in a realm, So anyways, back to the talk, to the title. So, wait a minute, guys. Why is the... What? I don't know, guys. Something weird's happening. The title reverted back. What the fuck? How's that even? Oh, I had 2 live streams open. Alright, hang on, guys. The title that you're seeing is not the title for this episode. It's yesterday's title. Man, people are like, what is he talking about? It's just like the title wasn't even corrected. Okay, guys, I corrected the title. So now people know this is the episode. This is how the title of the episode should look like. Anyways, back to it. So this thing about the bird that inspired the Wright brothers, okay, what does that mean? Something natural, like human beings don't have wings. We don't have natural wings, but we had an intelligence that unnaturally compensated for what we naturally didn't have. Do you see what I'm saying? This is the genius of the human species. We unnaturally gave ourselves the ability to access our deeper natural desires. So, if a bird inspired an airplane, and if the human brain inspired an engine, what else is left to inspire us? And I think I'm going to make one of the most, unique and interesting statements ever, that for me, just like the Wright brothers were inspired by a bird flying in space, I would say I am inspired by how intelligence is present in space. Because in Vedic thought they say Purusha and Prakriti is simultaneous, right? Even though Parabrahman is unconditional, but I'm saying they're pretty much saying matter and mind and body had to emerge simultaneously. Okay? So think of it this way: the child is born. The child has no consciousness, no remembrance of being like a baby, right? And not having a sort of rational remembrance system developed. So the child doesn't remember, but when the child's mind activates, then the child's life begins. It's as if you reached a checkpoint, and that's when it's like your earliest memory is how you logged into being a person. Now, I have been thinking something like last night, I'll tell you. Last night, before I sleep, I was just thinking like, man, what is this world? I was just like, why? Like, I could say I had a deep understanding last night of why man needs a higher power. Because I looked at this world and I was like, universe, you have given me a mind. You have brought me into a plane of existence. You have brought me into a universal sector. But you have also given me so many different angles that it's like when you look at life as an internal entity, you're wondering from which viewpoint should I look at this whole thing? And so this is why philosophers were way more fearless, than all those people who were satisfied with the first or second waves of information that hit them. The mystery of the world is your teacher. The unknown is your real teacher. And when you experience the unknown, then you realize you're the known student. Your name, your ego was never the student. The idea of you is like an Iron Man suit. Tony Stark is not the Iron Man suit. Imagine Tony Stark felt he was the Iron Man suit. His wife and kids like, Tony, stop it. Get out of the Iron Man suit. What the fuck? Like, you're in there so long, And imagine Tony Stark has forgotten he's Tony Stark. And he's like, yesterday, sweetie, I changed my name to Iron Man. I'm Iron Man now. My first name is Iron, last name Man. And Iron Man's wife like calls Thor. It's like, do something, Thor. And like a hammer out of nowhere hits Iron Man and breaks the suit. And Tony Stark comes back to his senses, you know. And later on, Thor just sees Iron Man and says, oops, you know. Anyways, the inspiration for how our purpose in this life will activate seems to be present. It doesn't make sense for nature and, let's say, universal intelligence to develop a creature so sophisticated after like 4.5 billion years or whatever, right? And then this creature being here and being like, what am I supposed to do here? That doesn't make sense. Do you see? And I feel that it's the linguistic system. It's as if we have to forget we are creatures and language, remember our presence as a sort of, remember our presence as the presence of the universal sector, and then activate as an idea. That means there are some people in this world where they have experienced being a self, and then they're in a world. But there are some beings who have experienced being a world first, then they can easily be a self in it. It's like the intelligence of this realm is so ahead, it's so advanced, that it's as if the invisible is preparing the visible before the visible can notice the invisible. So what this means is mankind is in an organized system, but the organization of this system cannot be comprehended by the human brain. And there has been a school of thought called Mysterianism, where they're like, yo, we can never figure it out. It's like, you know, people are like, why aren't there so many Mysterian philosophers? It's like, because they all gave up a long time ago. Because their ideology is kind of like, you'll never know. If I accept that there is not a greater meaning to this world, then the world descends into meaninglessness, and then that world doesn't make sense at all. Do you see? You have to hold the world in your attention with the elegance of your witnessing presence beyond your personality. So right now I am communicating to you as a personality, but the way that my personality is being organized and the way I have trust in these rhythms is simply because I am experiencing my presence before I'm being a person. And the energy is endless in that state. So I don't know how to say it, but it's kind of like when you're not an idea to yourself, energy is not subjectively, subconsciously being divided and conquered. You see, we are beings, and sometimes this like, how do I say it? Sometimes I feel human life is like music. Do you know? Just like me existing is like music being played. Do you know? It's like a happening. It's a great event that we are conscious enough to notice how many creatures in this world. You know, I've seen so many faces of adorable puppies that have no clue the Andromeda galaxy is our neighbor. You know, I had this feeling that if life was non-physical, like if the truth of life was non-physical, why would the physical be here? If the truth of life was just physical, why would memories, imagination, and visualization be here? So to me, it appears that our classification of what life means is wrong. Life is not like how do I say it? It's like every human being's perception and engagement with reality, regardless of your age and maturity, by the way, every person's consciousness is interacting with geometry ultimately. You know, I found it very strange that when I was young, you know, I remember my parents, I have a twin brother, you know, and my parents took us when we were like, I don't know, like 11 or something, to like this art gallery. And so when I was thinking about art galleries, I was like, what is this? right? Why is it that when I come into the art gallery, that artwork is suddenly beautiful, but when I'm outside looking at a tree, I don't consider that tree as artwork? Like, I don't consider my first person point of view as if I'm looking at the greatest artwork ever made. It's as if some artist was like, what's the greatest artwork? And an answer came from the void, the world. That means when it comes to creative responsibility, you can say there are beings that are in worlds, they have conditional will, and there are beings that have unconditional will. Which is another way of saying, if the human being is experiencing creativity as an individual, it's very probable in a dualistic universe that there is a creative force that is collective. This is just common sense. Okay, what it means is I'm using the common sense of duality. You see, a lot of things in life, they're double-edged. This is something you have to understand. A person's mind is like a point, and then it has multiple lines going through that point. Okay, when I speak, I open up an axis, and then I have a spectrum to talk about. You know? Somebody in the chat section says creative imaginations activates our energy outwardly. Yes, I agree with that. You know, I'll give you an example. I found myself super exhausted. You know, this was, I think, like a couple weeks ago. Super exhausted. Just, I don't know, like how the day had happened, but just I was so exhausted that I just fell to my bed, not even properly on the bed, like my foot on the ground, but my body on the bed. And for a second I was just lying there, and I'm like, yo, why don't I have the energy to move? And let me tell you how I created the energy for myself to move. I started projecting events in my inner realms where I was doing things. That means, think about it, when a human being behaves externally, we all know that something internally is happening. Even me giving this talk, right? If somebody was, you know, somebody hearing me now, there's like, okay, something's happening behind this guy's mind, behind this guy's face, you know. But the thing is that your inner reality is the context that you engage the outer realms through. So if somebody says this place is a bad world, their mind is literally looking for that pattern in reality. If somebody says this is a great world, or if somebody says we are the most advanced species in the universal sector, that's visible. We're the most advanced species on Earth for sure. You know, like some people say dolphins use 20% of their brains, but they don't have fingers. They can't compete. The human ability is access to a completely different interdimensional reality. We're the first creature in nature that is having an interdimensional experience that it can verify through other people's experiences. Like, think about it, dear viewers. What makes sense? You're in a physical world and imagination is unreal, even though you have it all the time, or you're in multiple worlds, and there's a world of subtlety of mind, and there's a world of subtlety of let's say sort of gross bodies. I'll tell you how I get the energy to give these talks, if anybody wonders how the process happens for me to give these talks. I'm pretty much going about my day, and then I'm just like, you know, from the beginning of the day when I wake up, I'm resetting the motives. How would I say it? It's like I wrote a sentence down for myself years ago, and I wrote that I don't want to live in a world that looks the same the next day. So I realized that I have to change, and in order for us to change, we need to do something. You know, for example, I'm a human being. I've been for a decade like communicating online. I ask myself, what is that value that my life is here for? And when I ask myself what are the options, it's either inefficiency or efficiency. Everybody's destiny is being filtered through this. And this world is so bizarre that I think it's a mistake. It could perhaps be like a early first prototype of an attempt mistake, that we think that the best way to live on earth is an individual. It could be. It could be that language is a technology at a different speed, and the actual speed that nature knows itself through is very different than the compartmentalization of making yourself into an ego and then having that ego doubt all the worlds in accordance to its own limited design. For me, I'm like, okay, I'm alive once, 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere. The smartest thing we could do in the outer realms is build an advanced civilization. The smartest thing we could do in the inner realms is to advance the communication of the human being. To advance communication in the inner realms means to discover the nature of advanced communication, and to be an advanced communicator is the instantaneous realization that you're the advanced communication of the universal sector. As the sage by the name of Swami Krishnananda says, meditation stops once you realize once you see the inseparability between the individual activity and the cosmic activity. Your psychological life is existing because a part of you, through original fear, has in some sense separated itself from reality. What it means is that a part of you doesn't trust your world, so you are a fragmented entity. Now, how does a fragmented entity, how does a shattered mirror become complete? Different strategies. Either miracles from beyond this dimension fix the shattered mirror, or every piece of the shattered mirror becomes a mirror and universe of its own. You see, pretty much there's two directions here: infinity or the void. Singularity, duality, these are privileges in between, noticings in between. And so, dear listener, to my knowledge, I'm the only person in modern human history who has the intent of building an advanced civilization on this earth. To plant the seeds. Sometimes you plant seeds for trees that you're not gonna, sleep under. For me, I'm like, think of it this way, right? I mean, we could use a basic business common sense to advance civilization, okay? We could be like, okay, let's say somebody has a company. So is your company better with more capable and intelligent employees, or is it better with more reactive and emotional employees? Well, the leader of the company says, because there is an expectation to get work done, right? We cannot just have an emotional team. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is why work is a domain of life where you put aside your emotions and you put on the hat of a professionalism. This is why when sometimes in these talks where I've accidentally cursed, said something like a swear word or something, that this is why sometimes I also feel a bit apologetic, because the standard of communication to my mind is one where we want to see the species advance before it fails, right? What it means is imagine, a bunch of extraterrestrials, they came to Earth and they're like, hey, human species, a meteor is going to hit your planet and you guys can't do anything. And we don't have the technology to help you guys out. Imagine the species had to accept a fate. What would happen to the human mind? We are living because the future has something to show us. That's why I would say, when I think about why am I alive, what's the true meaning of life? Because I don't know who I will be tomorrow. And I want to see that. You know, it's like as a being, I want to see what I become, to see the quality of the causal position I expressed. It's as if, okay, I have entered a realm, and oh world of worlds, you watch me as I watch you. But the task at hand, is it one of innocent being? Like, are we in this world to be pure, simple creatures? Or are we here to, in some sense, attempt the limitless? You know, it's as if some people are afraid of infinity, and some people, it's as if their souls are being called to the next phase. The infinite humanity means we do not fear immortality. We don't fear continuity, because our understanding of reality has reached such an energetic contentment that in the future they might not even have the concept of death and birth. You know, it's like when a child is born, the doctor's like, welcome back. You know, and then when a person is about to die, the person's like, see you guys, you know, and leaves. As if that sort of contentment, that the essence of our being is not the separation of a self in a world. We are its presence. And there is so much, right? Like, I'm recently, you know, I've had this feeling of like, man, you know, maybe I should like stop giving these talks and just go and try to physically just contribute to the advanced civilization, you know? But then I thought, like, the physical will eventually get to the level of the mind. Right now, our minds are slightly moving faster than our bodies. This is why we feel we're in control. But if our minds move incredibly faster than our bodies, we will not experience a single body. Think of it this way. Something speeds up when you take like when you film it. It's as if you see the different frames, right? You see all the different points, you know, that particle in space is passing through, okay? You know, this question of if we are a physical being, then a physical, like, it's strange, you know? It's like we're non-physically being physical and we're visibly being invisible. Or invisibly being visible. Like, it's simultaneous. My existence is physical. My experience of my existence, how can it be physical? It's like I'm the space where my body's in. So this is the presence of the whole moment, rather than being just the content in your moment. That means, imagine somebody who loved others, who loved themselves and loved the world. Then they would be left in a point where they had to love conceptuality. They had to love. It's like you reach a point where you see it's actually shape moving in space, or space moving shape, whichever way you choose to see. Some people choose to consider space as just like this invisible, just like this empty room, and there's some people who are like, space can be interpreted only when the force is moving a particle, right? So it's like stuff is moving in accordance to forces, and space is like how it appears to us. Anyways, so if the Wright brothers saw a bird and they got inspired by it, that means the human being can notice what it doesn't have and can move towards it. So out of all the strategies and all the perceptions of living, this creature has decided that it chooses to see ahead. So internally we see ahead of the moment, and externally we fulfill the moment. Sorry guys, this was on mute and I was just talking. I shared this story about this sage talking to a king. If that was heard, let me know. If it wasn't, whatever, I'll move on. So I'm saying things of a natural level have inspired human beings to create things on an unnatural level that can give them that ability to compete. The only reason human beings got out of the animal food chain was because we built weapons and tools, and we could see more about the environment. The evolution of the mind of man was that of a hunter. If you look at the psychology and consciousness of a hunter, okay guys, it says somebody says it was muted. Oh man, so that was probably like 5 minutes muted, 5-6 minutes. Damn. Okay, whatever. I was sharing the story of how there was this king. He had 3 princes. Like the oldest prince, you know, he had the imperial guard, like the palace guard at the front of the kingdom, you know. Was like his childhood friend or something. So every day this prince would in some sense go and, like, you know, talk to his palace guard friend at the front of the kingdom. So he goes there one morning and they're both having tea and laughing and remembering the good times, and suddenly a beggar comes out of nowhere and says, please, recognizes the guy as a prince, and the beggar says, please help me, you know, give me some, or sorry, the beggar doesn't realize the guy is a prince. The beggar just comes and says, please help me, give me something, you know, something like that. And the king says, you don't, even if I gave you something, you wouldn't know its value, you know, or something like that. The prince responds like that. Takes the path of arrogance. And so the guard like kicks the beggar, and the beggar leaves and like goes into a hysteria and runs away. After some time, there's another person walking towards the kingdom, like the front of the king, like the gate of the kingdom, where the prince and the palace guard are. And this guy is dressed in like Gandhi fashion. And so he goes up, this guy is walking, and this guy is a sage, a mystic, like a yogi, you know, like a wandering holy man. He goes up and the palace guard grabs the spear, like, don't come any closer or something. And the sage goes up and says, I'm here to speak to the prince. He already knows the guy is a prince, you know. And he says, I'm here to speak to the prince. And the prince is shocked. The palace guard is a bit shocked, right? The palace guard looks at the prince as if, do you know this guy? And the prince, with his eyes, says to the palace guard, like, no, right? And then the guy says, I am here to save you, prince. And then the palace guard and the prince both start laughing, right? And the prince says, you are here to save me? I'm the next king. I am the most privileged person in this land, in this kingdom, right? You're trying to save me? Save me from what? Ha ha ha, they start laughing. This is the moral of the story. The sage looks at the prince and he says, I am here to save you from yourself. And the next thing I'm going to say, I don't know if this part was recorded or not, but pretty much there has been a sort of karmic thing, hilarious karmic thing going on with sages, wise sages and holy men and kings and queens in history. Okay? And let me tell you why. The king was the person who was feared by all egos in the kingdom. That was the archetype of the king. The king was the top position, the most important person in the world in that kingdom, for that kingdom. Okay? Now, because the king was the most important person and he had the ego which could express wrath, nobody would tell the king. Nobody would correct this king. And so many kings were left with having no honest counsel. And so the only people who could counsel kings, who were fearless enough to talk to these kings and queens, were those who had no self. That means there is a lineage of selfless beings guiding the top positions in manifestation usually. But it comes to intent, and the species has moved past the phase of ritualism. If there is any sort of esotericism going on with ritualism, that's too old school. Like it's not what the divine's looking for anymore. Do you know? There was a time when Buddha was born, right? There was Brahmanism. And Brahmanism, like you see the ritualism you see in nowadays, right? But back in the day, their ritualism was so bizarre. Buddha was born in a world where when he went looking for the truth, people were doing all sorts of weird shit. Somebody was tied, like there's a story, Buddha was passing this tree. And he sees a bunch of people with their legs tied to the tree hanging upside down. Right? And Buddha's like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we're trying to experience God. We're trying to do something weird happens so we experience God. And Buddha was like, this is foolishness. You guys are acting like bats, and leaves. Something in those lines, right? When will the roars of the advanced civilization be heard on Earth? When will 8 billion lions roar with the strength of 10,000 suns? Mankind will realize its significance through a universal context, and all the suffering of individualism will instantly leave, because you have remembered you are a universal being, not just a human being. To yourself, you may be human. To yourself, you may even choose any archetype. I remember I went to a house party, and the host of the house party came and said, hey guys, I'm a demon. And people in the house party were like, yo, that's cool, man. People were engaging, and I'm like, how easily, the significance behind words are forgotten. Because for me, I'm sensitive to language. Why? Because language is creating the authorization for karma. Language is the code. The story you tell yourself becomes the freedom the world shows you, or can show you based on what you permit. The advanced humanity, they will be like lightning. I don't know how to say it. Imagine you suddenly one day all human beings stepped out of their homes, and they noticed that there was like a wind of light passing through at incredible speed between all the alleys and all the streets on Earth. Do you know? And this was the will of the advanced humanity. What does this mean? We are living for our greatest image. And because God is inconceivable, the greatest image left for man is the greatest potential from a theological standpoint of God's creation. You are here so that God can see how great its creation was. Or from a secular perspective, you are here to show the universe what it has never seen. For the great pilots of this earth, they remember the future before they enter it. Thank you for listening. And share, subscribe, comment, like. And as a question, what inspires you? Or what is your greatest value in this life? What is the greatest value in this life? Thank you for listening. Rise, mankind, rise.